Good evening and a very warm welcome to your English news package with radio and television Tonga for the hour. Making headlines, police have recorded their first death for this year of someone who fell from a high building in a public place. Tonga and Japan signed a non-project to grant assistance of 150 million yen to the fisheries sector, and the Ministry of Fisheries is working to educate communities about new ways of fishing as living organisms in Tongan waters are declining due to overfishing. Now with the news in details. Police have recorded their first death for this year of someone who fell from a high building in a public place. This follows the death of a young man last Friday while doing carpentry. Paula with the details.
And the Deputy Police Commissioner David Vailea told Radio and Television Tonga News this morning that deceased is a 26-year-old young man from Lomaiviti. The deceased was among those doing carpentry at one of the government buildings, and he climbed at a height of more than 4 meters above ground when the incident happened, resulting in his death. We are working closely with the doctors on the post-mortem examination while investigating the surrounding area where he died to determine the original cause of his death. Meanwhile, police did not provide any further details, but Vailea urges the public, especially carpenters, to ensure they abide by the safety rules and regulations while out in the field. Investigation into the matter continues. Paula for Radio and Television Tonga News.
The Japanese government will fund new equipment to the fisheries sector through their non-project grant assistance worth 150 million yen to assist the recovery process of the Ministry of Fisheries following the aftermath of the 15th of January devastation. The grant assistance was signed by the Prime Minister, Honorable Hogama Meriko, and the Japanese Ambassador, His Excellency Munenaka Kensaku. Paula again with more on the story.
According to statistics, 30% of the population are involved in fisheries, and as announced by the Prime Minister Hogama Meriko on the 8th of March, the fishery industry is suffering following the eruption and the tsunami that ensued in January. The Japanese ambassador, His Excellency Munenaka Kensaku, said this assistance provides useful equipment requested by the Ministry of Fisheries, such as new equipment for the Fisheries Mariculture Center, a variety of vessels, boats, and so forth.
Today's assistance, just signed by both of us, is to assist the recovery process of the Ministry of Fisheries from the disasters under the Non-Project Grant Aid, NPGA in short. It is worth 150 million Japanese yen and will provide useful equipment requested by the Ministry of Fisheries, such as new equipment for the Fisheries Mariculture Center, a variety of vessels and boats, and so forth. Since the disaster, the people and the government of Japan have been supporting Tonga in various ways. Apart from the emergency relief assistances at the initial stage provided by our self-defense force, today's assistance is in line with the development plan by the ministry. The selection of the equipment and vessels are based on the request from the ministry. I hope, and I am rather confident, that today's NPGA will support Tonga's fisheries industry and put it on the right track to recovery, or rather, on the better way to its development. I trust that this assistance will encourage the affected people and communities of the fisheries industry.
Meanwhile, Hogama Meriko says this grant aid assistance will not only address the impacts of the Hunga-Tonga-Hungahapai volcano eruption, but can also improve Tonga's fisheries sector and food security situation with better machines, facilities, and equipment.
Our two governments continue to attach great importance to each other's prosperity and security, working effortlessly to make a difference for peoples of both our countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to express my gratitude here to Ambassador Muninanga and the government of Japan for this funding assistance to fisheries. The fishery sector was severely affected by the tsunami that was triggered by the Tonga Ha'apai volcanic eruption, affecting both offshore and inshore fisheries, marine ecosystems, onshore infrastructure, and fisheries facilities. Fish and fisheries are an integral part of most societies, and Tonga is heavily dependent on its fisheries and ocean resources for their basic livelihood, for food, transport, economic development, and culture. In this unique Japan's non-project grant assistance, the provision of machines, facilities, and equipment will be utilized in post-disaster recovery, rehabilitation, and ultimately support Tonga's national fisheries development programs.
On the day of the disaster, many fishing boats were destroyed and lost. Related equipments and facilities in coastal areas were also damaged, which cost the Tongan fisheries industry about 21.6 million paanga. Vaifanatu Paula for Radio and Television Tonga News.
The government announced that a few primary schools returned back to their classrooms today from the Early Childhood Education, or ECE, to Class 6. Waifanatu Paula again with the details.
The government primary school of Eweki was the only primary school in Tongatapu to return to the classroom, while all primary schools of Otumotulalo in Vava'u, Otumu'omua, Lulunga Islands, and Eastern District 2 of Ha'apai returned to their regular school schedules. According to a statement from the Ministry of Education, the resuming of all primary schools in Tongatapu, Vava'u, and Ha'apai, apart from those returned today, will be announced at a later date. Since COVID-19 reached Tonga in February, all schools in Tongatapu, Vava'u, and Ha'apai were closed, and classes were held online or through radio and via television broadcast. Meanwhile, in April, the Ministry of Health first launched the vaccination rollout for children ages between 5 and 11. According to the data from the Ministry of Health, 43% of children ages between 5 to 11 have already received their first dose, and only 3% have gotten their second dose. Vafanatu Paula for Radio and Television Tonga News.
The Ministry of Fisheries is working to educate communities on new ways of fishing as living organisms in our waters are declining due to overfishing. It is understood that many people rely on fishing natural living species from the sea, but not those in aquaculture. The Ministry of Fisheries is moving to farm living species in communities for fishermen to minimize the harvest of organisms in the ocean so that they may be preserved. According to worldwide figures from the Food Agriculture Organization, or FAO, there are two types of fishing, which are fishing of fish that grow naturally in the ocean and the aquaculture. The head of the aquaculture division of the Ministry of Fisheries, Martini Finau, said fishing of natural living species such as snappers and shallow water fish from the ocean has increased by 14% worldwide. Worldwide figures show that aquaculture has increased by 527% and consumption of fish during this time increased by 122%. The CEO for the Ministry of Fisheries, Dr. Tuikolongahau Halafihi, explained the current situation of fishing in Tonga and the effects of overfishing of living organisms. The reason why this project was established is because it shows that living species in the ocean is decreasing, especially those in the coastal areas and reefs. This is caused by overpopulation and commercial fishing, as well as climate change. It also includes ocean pollution, and there are lots of challenges that cause the decrease of living organisms in the sea. The ministry is moving to aquaculture or breeding of living species in the ocean in communities to preserve for the people. It appears that growth of living organisms in the sea is slow, and there are many people using shallow water fishing, including commercial fishing, and that's why we are moving to do this project so that it may preserve these living species. He also explained the work being done by the ministry in the aquaculture of communities. We already started this project in the communities, like breeding of pearls and sea cucumbers. We are also practicing how to breed mullet fish or ganahe and prawns, and we are pushing this program to include more living species to breed in the communities. At the meantime, this goes together with our program to special management areas or SMAs so that we can breed them so they could grow naturally in the ocean. The 3-year plan of the Ministry of Fisheries is to continue development and extend the opportunities of breeding living organisms. The program started in Navutoka and other communities in the Hahage district. There is no cure for Alzheimer's and dementia. However, consultant psychiatrist Dr. Edwin Mao urges the public to be more aware of this health condition and to assist those affected, as there are few people in Tonga suffering from the disease. Mark Age with more on this story.
Dr. Edwini Ma'u says dementia and Alzheimer's is common, particularly those aged 65 and above, when changes occur in people's brain, resulting in memory loss. He added that the development of Alzheimer's and dementia can actually start 20 years earlier.
So, because there's no treatment for dementia, it's really important that we start focusing on our lives in our 40s and 50s. There's really good evidence out there for modifiable risk factors for dementia, but fundamentally they boil down to anything that's good for your heart is good for your head. I mean, your brain uses 20% of your oxygen and glucose needs, so that means that anything that affects your heart, be it high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, your diet, lack of exercise, all of those factors will increase your risk down the line of developing dementia. So from my point of view, and a lot of my research is around dementia prevention, it's actually really important to be focusing on people in their 30s and 40s because that's when the changes start. The message that we're trying to get across is that prevention is better than cure. So look after your heart, look after your brain in your 30s and 40s, and you're not going to get those changes that result in dementia down the line. The reality is most people in older age don't develop dementia. So it's never too late to start. Even if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, if you look after your body and your heart, exercise, watch your diet, make sure your diabetes and hypertension is well treated, all of those things, even if those changes in your brain have started, can still be delayed.
Dr. Mao emphasized the importance for caregivers to have more patience when looking after those with Alzheimer's, and most importantly, to be more compassionate with them.
Yeah, look, I think the other thing that's important is to get a diagnosis, because it's important for families and their carers to understand that the difficulties that their loved one is experiencing by and large is out of their control. And it's really hard when someone develops dementia and they get these personality changes and it feels like they're being really difficult. So it's important to understand and to have patience that actually a lot of the behaviours that they're manifesting aren't actually a reflection of them, but is just their brain trying to process everything that's happening. We know that caring for people with dementia is hard, and I'm happy to see the work that Huelo Association is doing here in Tonga to try and support carers to improve that understanding and the basic education around dementia and how best to care for people.
Dr. Ma'u held a charity program today at the Universal Pharmacy at Whanga, where medicine was free of charge for those with Alzheimer's. This program will be held again on Wednesday and Friday. Dr. Ma'u arrived in Tonga as part of New Zealand's Pacific Medical Association team here in the kingdom to assist with humanitarian efforts following the January 15th devastation.
A total of 575 repatriation passengers from New Zealand and Australia are expected to arrive in Tonga on Wednesday, the 1st of June. This is the continuation of the government's repatriation program since the border closure in March 2020 due to the global pandemic. The CEO of Maydeck, Paula, says both repatriation flights will arrive this Wednesday and will be quarantined at the Danoa Hotel, Makeke side Kubesi Hotel, while some will be in home quarantine. All these passengers will undergo the COVID red test 24 hours prior to their departure. The new quarantine period for Tonga will be 5 days only and will be effective this Wednesday, meaning all passengers arriving to that day will only have to complete 5 days quarantine at the MIQ. And for the second time, Tongatapu 10 MP Reverend Dr. Pohivadonetoa was found guilty in the Supreme Court for bribery. His legal counsel, Clive Edwards, said his client wants to appeal the ruling, but they must wait for the written ruling as he needs to carefully review it for conditions in order to file the appeal. Dr. Dionetoa was sued by his fellow candidate from Tongatapu 10, Gabriel Lanmata, for 3 allegations of bribery in which he was only convicted for 1. He was found guilty for donating a free water tank to a voter on the 17th of November before the election. Following this conviction, Lord Chief Justice Michael Whitten declared the election of Dr. Dionetoa on November 18 elections last year was void. Lord Chief Justice Michael Whitten also ruled that the respondent must pay the 13% as half of the cost of the petitioner in these proceedings. However, the Supreme Court had already granted Reverend Dr. Pohivadonetoa's application to stay the court's ruling against him after he was convicted for bribery by the former town officer of Tarasiu. Edwards previously told radio and television Tonga News that his client will apply for another stay if he makes an appeal to the Court of Appeal. And that concludes tonight's English news package. But before we part, here's one final look at tonight's top stories. Police have recorded their first death for this year of someone who fell from a high building in a public place. Tonga and Japan signed a non-project grant assistance of 150 million yen to the fisheries sector, and the Ministry of Fisheries is working to educate communities about new ways of fishing as living organisms in Tongan waters are declining due to overfishing. And that's it for tonight. Thank you for your company. I'm Alice Itupo. Have a blessed evening.